The wind whipped down Fifth Avenue like it had been sent to erase her. Evelyn Sawyer stood on the marble steps of the Ellington Tower penthouse, clutching a thin duffel bag, the only thing Grant had allowed her to take. The door slammed behind her, the click of the new digital lock echoing like a final verdict. She stared as the lights of Manhattan blurred through tears she refused to let fall. The city glowed with life, Rolex ads flashing above, taxis honking, the hum of luxury that used to be her world. Now she didn't even have a place to sleep. Behind the glass railing 20 floors up, Grant Ellington's silhouette appeared, tall, broad, and smug. Next to him, Sophie Mercer leaned her head on his shoulder, the perfect picture of triumph in a cream Dior coat. Evelyn watched as Sophie raised a champagne flute, her champagne, from her cabinet, and toasted to the night Grant had thrown his wife onto the street. "Should have checked the paperwork before signing it, Eve," Sophie called down, her voice slicing through the cold air. Grant didn't bother to speak. He only smiled, that slow, cruel smile he used on business rivals right before destroying them. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Account frozen, contact administrator. Then another notification. Hearing rescheduled to tomorrow. Attendance required. Her chest tightened. She had no lawyer, no money, no home, no chance. Grant had stripped everything from her in less than 24 hours. And tomorrow, she was expected to walk into Manhattan Family Court alone, facing a man with a fleet of attorneys who billed more per hour than she earned in a week. A black Mercedes S-Class rolled up beside her. Grant's driver leaned out the window. "Mr. Ellington said to remind you the prenup leaves you with nothing," he said, barely hiding a smirk. "He also asked me to give you this." The driver tossed her a plastic grocery bag. Inside, a single bottle of cheap water and a folded brochure for a women's shelter in Brooklyn. Her hands shook. How did it come to this? A month ago, she was working late alongside Grant, designing luxury interiors, drinking Starbucks caramel macchiatos while sketching ideas on her old MacBook Air. A month ago, she believed in him, believed they were a team. Now she was disposable. She walked toward the curb, the freezing wind slicing through her thin sweater. New York felt enormous, merciless. She blended into the shadows, another woman discarded by a powerful man who knew the system favored him. She tried to steady her breath, but panic clawed at her ribs. Tomorrow she would walk into that courtroom broken, humiliated, entirely alone. Or so Grant thought. Because all it would take was one question. "State your full legal name." And the moment she answered, Evelyn Marin Sawyer, the temperature in that courtroom would drop to ice, and Grant Ellington's entire world would begin to collapse. Evelyn Sawyer had once believed she was building a life worth protecting. At 31, she carried herself with a quiet confidence shaped by years of late nights, design deadlines, and a determination to prove she could make it in Manhattan without leaning on anyone's name, especially her family's. People often underestimated her. She wasn't flashy, didn't flaunt labels or wealth the way Grant's circle did. Instead, she loved simple things, sketching on her worn-edge notepad, drinking a vanilla latte while watching sunlight wash over the skyline, walking home with headphones in and imagining how she'd redesign the city piece by piece. But all of that belonged to a version of Evelyn she barely recognized now. Grant had chipped away at her life slowly, first by convincing her to leave her architecture firm, then by handling their finances, then by isolating her from colleagues who admired her talent. She mistook his control for protection. She mistook his arrogance for strength. And when the late-night meetings began, followed by the unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirts, she convinced herself stress was changing him, not betrayal. Her biggest mistake? She trusted him enough to sign documents he called routine. He had handed her a Mont Blanc pen one evening, smiling as if the moment meant something tender. She signed without reading, her judgment blurred by exhaustion and love. She'd later learned those signatures helped Grant move her assets, dismantle her legal protections, and present her as financially irrelevant. Now she was a woman with no job, no money, and a reputation Grant's PR team had quietly poisoned. A headline she didn't know existed had already labeled her a mentally unstable spouse. The industry she once adored was pulling away, worried she'd bring drama with her. She couldn't even book a consultation meeting. Every door she knocked on was already closed. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the humiliation, a flicker still burned. Because Evelyn Sawyer had survived worse, she had rebuilt herself before. She knew what it meant to start from nothing. And what Grant didn't understand, what no one in his world understood, was that Evelyn never stayed broken for long. By morning, she would walk into the courtroom as a woman stripped of everything. But she would not walk in defeated. Not when her name, the one she had hidden for years, still carried enough weight to end careers. Manhattan had always been a city that glittered, sometimes with promise, sometimes with danger. As Evelyn walked through the morning haze toward the courthouse, the skyscrapers around her felt taller than usual, looming like silent judges. The Ellington Tower where she once lived gleamed in the distance, its glass exterior catching the pale sunlight. It looked almost unreal, like a life she had dreamed instead of lived. Her hearing would take place in the Manhattan Family Court, a building she had passed 100 times, but never imagined entering under circumstances so humiliating. Inside, lawyers in tailored suits moved with brisk confidence, clutching leather briefcases, tapping messages on their iPhones as if nothing in the world could shake them. Evelyn felt small among them, her thrift store coat pulled tight, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She tried to ignore how out of place she looked. The security line dragged. People muttered. A baby cried somewhere behind her. A man in a suit whispered loudly into his phone about stock options. It all felt overwhelmingly normal for a day that could end her entire future. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, disinfectant, and tension. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with bulletin boards filled with divorce announcements, custody hearings, and legal reminders. Cold, bureaucratic snapshots of broken families. She wondered how many women had stood exactly where she stood now, feeling exactly this hollow ache in their chests. When she reached Courtroom 4B, her knees nearly buckled. Through the open doors, she saw Grant's legal team already inside. 3 attorneys in sharp navy suits, their Mont Blanc pens gleaming under the fluorescent lights as they shuffled stacks of folders thicker than textbooks. They looked like they had come to war. And Evelyn was the battlefield. Grant was there too. He leaned back in his chair like he owned the room, scrolling casually on his phone. Beside him, Sophie whispered something into his ear. She wore a soft pink coat and a smug expression that made Evelyn's stomach twist. Reporters stood in the back, waiting for any hint of drama. Evelyn felt their eyes drift toward her, assessing, guessing, preparing their headlines. She swallowed hard. This courtroom, this cold, echoing room with its wooden benches and unforgiving lights, would decide everything. Her reputation, her financial stability, her independence. She wanted to turn around, to run back into the city where she could disappear. But she forced herself forward, because even though she felt powerless, she wasn't. Not completely. Tomorrow, they would learn who she really was. The courtroom doors had barely closed when the humiliation began. Evelyn felt it, like a heat rising under her skin, long before Grant even acknowledged her. His attorneys spread glossy folders across the polished table, each one stamped with Ellington Development's logo. The sight alone made her stomach twist. Those folders contained their strategy: destroy her credibility before she even opened her mouth. As she took her seat on the opposite side, she heard Sophie's heels click against the floor. Sophie walked in slowly, deliberately, like she was arriving at a red carpet event instead of a divorce hearing. She wore a pearl-colored coat, her makeup flawless, her expression bright with mock sympathy. "Oh, Evelyn," she said softly, brushing imaginary dust off Grant's shoulder. "You look tired? Rough night?" Grant chuckled under his breath. Evelyn clenched her hands together to keep them from shaking. She kept her eyes on the table, but she could feel the reporters in the back leaning forward. Public humiliation was cheap entertainment in this city. Grant's lead attorney, a tall man with a voice smooth as glass, stood and addressed the room. Your Honor, before we begin, we need to submit additional documentation regarding Mrs. Ellington's mental state. The words sliced through her. The attorney lifted a stack of printed emails, fabricated, twisted versions of messages Evelyn once wrote during her most stressful moments. Out of context, they painted her as unstable, irresponsible, unfit for any financial or legal responsibility. Sophie pretended to gasp softly, placing a hand over her stomach like she was protecting a child that didn't even exist. Grant, I told you she needed help, the attorney continued. We request that the court consider full asset control to Mr. Ellington for the safety and stability of all parties involved. The room buzzed. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "It looks bad for her." Grant leaned back, arms crossed, confidence radiating off him. He looked like a man watching a victory unfold. But the worst blow came when the judge entered. Judge Pierce. A man with cold eyes and an expression that barely concealed his alliance with Grant. Pierce had presided over dozens of cases involving wealthy families, and rumors about his favoritism were practically public record. He glanced at Evelyn only once, dismissing her entirely. "Let's begin," he said. At that moment, Evelyn felt utterly exposed, a lone figure surrounded by wolves. But under the crushing humiliation, beneath the shame burning across her cheeks, a single thought steadied her. They think I'm no one. They have no idea who I really am. Evelyn sat stiffly on the courtroom bench, her heart pounding as Judge Pierce flipped through Grant's stack of carefully curated accusations. Every page turned felt like another nail sealing her fate. She had no lawyer, no evidence, and no one to speak for her. The reporters were already drafting tomorrow's headlines in their heads. Ellington CEO wins, wife declared unstable. Sophie leaned into Grant, whispering loudly enough for Evelyn to hear, "This will be over quickly. She has no one." And for a moment, Evelyn believed it. The weight of that truth pressed hard against her lungs. She looked down at her trembling hands, wishing she could disappear into the wooden bench. She felt small, cornered, defeated. Then the courtroom doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet click and soft footsteps against the floor. But somehow, the energy shifted. Even Judge Pierce paused mid-sentence. A man in a charcoal suit walked in, tall, steady, carrying a worn leather briefcase. His presence didn't shout. It whispered authority. He moved to the front with calm precision. "Your Honor," he said, voice firm but respectful, "I am filing an emergency appearance on behalf of Mrs. Evelyn Sawyer." Evelyn's head snapped up. Grant's smile faltered. Sophie blinked rapidly, confused. Judge Pierce narrowed his eyes. "And you are?" The man placed a document on the judge's desk. "Caleb Ward, corporate litigation attorney." A hush rippled through the courtroom. Everyone knew that name. Caleb Ward wasn't just a lawyer. He was the man Fortune magazine once called the legal scalpel for the way he dissected billion-dollar fraud cases. He didn't take small clients. He didn't take losing cases. And he certainly didn't appear unannounced. Judge Pierce frowned. "Mrs. Ellington did not submit counsel." "She has now," Caleb replied smoothly, "and I request immediate access to all discovery materials submitted by Mr. Ellington's team." Grant stood, attempting confidence but failing. "Caleb, this is unnecessary. You're misinformed." Caleb didn't even look at him. "I'm fully informed," he said, opening his briefcase. "In fact, I have documentation that contradicts several claims made here today." Evelyn stared at him, stunned. She didn't hire him. She didn't even know him. He glanced her way, eyes steady. Voice low enough only she could hear. "You're not alone anymore, Evelyn." Her breath caught. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt the slightest spark of hope. Grant Ellington had always been composed, but now a crack appeared, small, sharp, unmistakable. Caleb Ward's arrival disrupted the rhythm he'd rehearsed for weeks. His attorneys whispered rapidly, flipping through folders, recalculating strategies. Sophie clung to Grant's arm, her polished confidence suddenly brittle. Judge Pierce adjusted his glasses, irritation tightening his jaw. "Mr. Ward, this is a family court matter. Your presence is highly irregular." Caleb remained calm. "So is the fraudulent evidence submitted by Mr. Ellington's team, which the court will need to address." A murmur swept through the room. Grant stepped forward, forcing authority into his voice. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. My wife—" He stopped, then corrected sharply. "Evelyn is clearly exploiting a situation she doesn't understand." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. He always did this, made her feel small, ignorant, dependent. Every word carried an undercurrent of control meant only for her ears. Caleb spoke before she could shrink back. "Mr. Ellington, if Mrs. Sawyer doesn't understand the situation, perhaps it's because you went to great lengths to hide it." Sophie scoffed, tossing her hair. "You don't know anything about us." Caleb finally turned to her, expression unreadable. "I know enough." He laid several documents on the judge's desk. "These emails, Your Honor, appear in Mr. Ellington's submission as evidence of instability. Yet the metadata reflects they were altered 2 weeks ago, after the couple separated." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Grant's attorney stiffened. "That's impossible." Caleb tapped the page. "It's also illegal." Judge Pierce's expression faltered for the first time. Grant's facade finally cracked. His face reddened as he leaned toward Caleb. "What do you think you're doing? This isn't your fight." Caleb met his glare without flinching. "It is now." Evelyn felt her chest tighten, not in fear this time, but in disbelief. Someone was standing up to Grant. Someone was actually defending her. But the enemy wasn't finished. Grant lifted his chin, regaining composure. "Your Honor, even if metadata discrepancies exist, they don't change the central issue. My wife suffers from psychological instability. We have recordings. Witness statements." Sophie's voice chimed in sweetly. "She once cried for hours because she felt overwhelmed. It was concerning. Lies, twisted half-truths, weaponized vulnerabilities." Evelyn swallowed hard, shame burning through her. She wanted to defend herself, to speak, but the words lodged in her throat. Caleb placed a steady hand on the table near hers, anchoring her. "Don't worry," he murmured. "Their story is collapsing. Let them talk." And for the first time, Grant sensed it. The power in the room was beginning to shift. The air in Courtroom 4B grew heavier as Judge Pierce leaned forward, his expression sharpening. He tapped his gavel once, not to quiet the room, but to regain control. "Mr. Ward, your claims will be reviewed, but at this moment, the court must examine Mrs. Sawyer's mental fitness. Proceed with the evidence." Evelyn froze. Grant nodded to his attorney, who retrieved a flash drive and connected it to the courtroom monitor. "Your Honor, we present recorded audio documenting Mrs. Sawyer's emotional instability." The first clip played. Her own voice filled the room, breaking, shaking, pleading. "Grant, please. I'm trying. I just need you to stop yelling. I can't take this right now." A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. That night had been one of the lowest points in her marriage. She had been working 80-hour weeks, Grant hammering her with impossible expectations, Sophie already circling in the background like a silent predator. She had cried, overwhelmed and exhausted, and now the moment was weaponized against her. Reporters scribbled furiously. Sophie smirked. Grant appeared sympathetic, a hand dramatically pressed to his chest. "You see, Your Honor? I worried for her safety." Another clip played, this one even worse. Evelyn's breathing was ragged, panicked. "I feel like I'm disappearing, Grant. You don't see me. Nothing I do matters." Judge Pierce's expression hardened. "This is concerning." Evelyn's throat closed. She wanted to scream the truth, that these moments came after Grant belittled her for hours. After he drained her financially and emotionally, after Sophie accidentally left traces of herself around their home. But trauma had a way of silencing people, and now her silence was being painted as guilt. Caleb stepped forward. "Your Honor, these recordings lack context." Pierce cut him off. "The court will decide relevance." Then came the final blow. A witness statement. Grant's attorney called Sophie to testify. She walked to the stand with theatrical melancholy, fingertips brushing her non-existent baby bump. "I hate being here," she whispered, projecting innocence. "But I saw Evelyn in moments that frightened me." She dabbed a tear that didn't exist. "She once told me she didn't know who she was anymore, that she felt broken. I was scared she'd hurt herself." The courtroom gasped. Evelyn shut her eyes, breath trembling. In a matter of minutes, Grant had painted her as unhinged, unsafe, unstable. And worst of all, the judge looked like he believed every word. Evelyn felt the walls closing in on her. With every lie Sophie spun, every false narrative Grant reinforced, her voice seemed to shrink further inside her chest. She sat motionless at the defendant's table, fingers curled tightly around the edge, as though the wood itself might anchor her to reality. The judge's expression, cold, measured, dismissive, might as well have been a sentence already passed. Caleb rose to object again, but Judge Pierce shut him down with a raised hand. "Mr. Ward, unless you have concrete evidence refuting these claims, the court must consider them credible." The gavel's soft tap echoed through Evelyn's bones. Sophie stepped down from the witness stand, her face arranged into an expression of delicate suffering. Grant wrapped an arm protectively around her waist for everyone to see. A performance. A mockery. And the room seemed fully convinced. Evelyn's throat tightened painfully. She wanted to shout, "This isn't who I am. This isn't what happened." But the words dissolved before reaching her lips. Trauma had stolen enough from her already. Now it was stealing her ability to defend herself. A reporter whispered, "She looks unstable." Another murmured, "This might end her." Their voices dug into her like thorns. Judge Pierce flipped to the next page of Grant's submission, nodding slowly. "Mrs. Sawyer, based on current evidence, the court is inclined to consider emergency financial control in favor of Mr. Ellington." A sharp physical ache tore through her. Emergency control meant Grant controlled everything. Her accounts, her assets, even her ability to move. She would be legally powerless. Grant didn't hide his smile this time. It was small, satisfied, cruel. Sophie lowered her gaze demurely, but Evelyn caught the glint of victory in her eyes. Caleb leaned toward her. "Evelyn, breathe. This isn't over." But she wasn't sure she believed him. Her vision blurred. She felt herself sinking, drowning in a courtroom full of people who had already decided she was broken. Judge Pierce cleared his throat, ready to finalize a ruling that would destroy her life. In that instant, Evelyn realized something devastating. Grant had planned every second of this. The fake evidence, the altered recordings, the staged concern, even Sophie's tears. And the court, everyone in it, was falling right into his hands. Her pulse hammered. Her palms went cold. For the first time, she wondered if Grant might actually win. Judge Pierce lifted his gavel, ready to issue a temporary ruling, one that would hand Grant full control of everything Evelyn had left. Evelyn's nails dug into her palms. She felt the world narrowing to a pinpoint. The courtroom lights blurring, her breath shallow. This was it. This was how her life ended. Not with violence, but with a signature. "Before I issue my ruling," Judge Pierce said, "the court requires the respondent to state her full legal name for the record." Evelyn's pulse faltered. Grant leaned back, relaxed. Sophie smoothed her coat, confident the formality would only quicken Evelyn's defeat. Caleb glanced at Evelyn, silently urging her on. She rose slowly. Her knees trembled, but her voice, when it finally emerged, was steady. "My name is Evelyn Marin Sawyer." Silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a courtroom, a drop-dead, suffocating stillness. Judge Pierce's expression changed instantly, like ice cracking under sudden heat. His gavel lowered. His shoulders stiffened. He stared at Evelyn as if seeing her for the first time. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Sawyer, a name that didn't just belong to a family, it belonged to a legacy. A lineage that had shaped judicial ethics in New York for decades. A name tied to prosecutors, attorneys general, federal investigators, and one man in particular. Pierce swallowed hard. Sawyer, as in the Sawyer family? Evelyn didn't flinch. Yes, Your Honor. Sophie blinked. What does that matter? Grant's face drained of color. Caleb stepped forward. For the record, Your Honor, Mrs. Sawyer is the niece of Edward Sawyer. Gasps filled the room. One reporter whispered, The Edward Sawyer? The federal investigator? Another added, Pierce ruled against him once. It nearly cost him his seat. Judge Pierce's hands trembled, ever so slightly. Grant shot to his feet. This is irrelevant. Her family has nothing to do with... But the panic in his voice betrayed him. Caleb continued, voice smooth as steel. Given the court's prior interactions with the Sawyer family, I believe impartiality would require additional review before any ruling is issued. Pierce's jaw tightened. His mask of confidence shattered. Grant hissed under his breath. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Evelyn met his stare for the first time without fear. You never asked. The courtroom was no longer on Grant's side, and for the first time, it was afraid of her. Judge Pierce shifted uncomfortably in his seat, flipping through the documents before him with hands that no longer moved confidently. The courtroom's energy had changed, no longer stacked against Evelyn, but suspended in a tense, electric uncertainty. Evelyn sat straighter. Her heartbeat still rapid, but steadier now. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't drowning. Caleb adjusted his tie and stepped forward with the quiet precision of a man who knew exactly how to dismantle an empire. Your Honor, now that Mrs. Sawyer's identity is properly recognized, the court should also acknowledge a serious matter regarding Mr. Ellington's financial disclosures. Grant stiffened. Caleb? Don't. But Caleb wasn't speaking to him. He opened a file, thick, tabbed, organized with unnerving accuracy, and slid it onto the judge's desk. This contains evidence that Mr. Ellington intentionally concealed offshore accounts tied to Ellington developments, accounts that were not included in the financial affidavit he submitted to this court. A loud stir rippled through the room. Sophie's face drained. Grant's attorneys scrambled, flipping through their own binders, panic rising like smoke. Judge Pierce frowned. Are you suggesting Mr. Ellington committed fraud during a court proceeding? Caleb didn't blink. The evidence strongly supports that conclusion. Grant rose abruptly, voice cracking under the weight of his fraying control. This is character assassination. Those accounts have nothing to do with... They have everything to do with this case, Caleb cut in sharply, because they were opened under Mrs. Sawyer's name. Evelyn's breath caught. What? She whispered. Grant's eyes snapped to her, wide, fearful, something she'd never seen in him before. Caleb continued. Mr. Ellington used his wife's identity to authorize several international transfers. Mrs. was Sawyer unknowingly holds legal authority over funds totaling more than $31 million. Shock exploded across the courtroom. Reporters nearly fell over each other. Judge Pierce stared at Grant. His earlier confidence evaporated. Mr. Ellington, is this true? Grant stuttered, searching for words. It's complicated. She didn't need to know. Sophie exhaled sharply, stepping away from him. You said you handled everything, she hissed. Caleb pressed forward. Your Honor, this discovery alone warrants a full investigation and immediate freezing of Mr. Ellington's personal and corporate assets until ownership is properly determined. Judge Pierce had no choice. This court will suspend all pending rulings until this matter is reviewed in depth. Mr. Ellington, you will comply. Grant collapsed back into his chair. And Evelyn realized, for the first time, Grant was losing. If Grant Ellington was unraveling, Sophie Mercer was shattering. The moment Caleb revealed the offshore accounts, something inside her snapped. Fear, fury, betrayal, all melting into one volatile expression. Her pretty composure, the gentle smiles she trained for cameras, evaporated. She stared at Grant like she was seeing a monster she had been sleeping beside. Judge Pierce called for a short recess, but the tension didn't recess with him. Reporters swarmed the hallway, buzzing like hornets around a collapsing hive. Sophie backed away from Grant, pressing herself against the wall as if she needed distance to breathe. "You said we were safe," she hissed, voice trembling. "You said the accounts were clean." Grant grabbed her wrist. "Lower your voice." She wrenched free. "You used her name? Evelyn's? Do you have any idea how illegal?" Grant's glare became deadly. "Sophie, not here." But Sophie was done being handled. Caleb approached them, calm as ever. Sophie straightened immediately, sensing an opportunity, or maybe an escape route. "You knew," she said to him. "You knew this whole time." Caleb lifted a brow. "I suspected, but I needed confirmation." Her eyes darted around. "If he goes down, they'll investigate everyone connected to him. I can't." She choked on the words. "I can't be dragged into prison because of him." Grant barked a cold laugh. "Relax, I'll fix this." Sophie shook her head. "You can't fix federal crimes, Grant." For the first time, Evelyn saw Sophie not as the woman who helped demolish her marriage, but as another person trapped in Grant's orbit. Willingly, yes, but trapped all the same. Caleb folded his arms. "Ms. Mercer, if you have information relevant to the case, withholding it will only strengthen the charges against you." Grant stepped between them. "She has nothing, and she's not speaking to you." But Sophie pushed past him, desperation overriding fear. "I do have something," she said, looking directly at Caleb. "Recordings, messages, things Grant said about Evelyn, things he planned." Evelyn's breath hitched. Grant's voice rose dangerously. "Sophie, don't!" But she was done listening. "You used me," Sophie spat. "You promised me the world, but you lied about everything, including the baby." The hallway erupted in whispers. Sophie squared her shoulders. "If saving myself means destroying you, then so be it." And just like that, the mistress became the weapon. The tension inside Courtroom 4B was palpable when the recess ended. Everyone returned to their seats except Sophie, who hovered near the witness stand, clutching her phone like it was the last piece of a sinking ship. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with a clarity Evelyn had never seen before. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. "Ms. Mercer, you stated during recess that you possess material evidence. Are you prepared to submit it?" Grant shot up so fast his chair screeched. "Your Honor, she is unstable. Anything she claims—" "Sit down, Mr. Ellington," Pierce snapped, irritation sharp in his tone. For once, Grant obeyed. Sophie stepped forward slowly. "Your Honor, I have audio recordings. Grant didn't know I saved them." She unlocked her phone. "They prove he manipulated Evelyn, hid assets, and planned this entire divorce months before she knew anything." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Caleb nodded toward her. "Play it." Sophie tapped a file. Grant's voice filled the speakers, dripping with arrogance. "She won't fight back. Evelyn's weak. Once she signs the transfer papers, she's done. And if she breaks down in court? Even better. The judge will never trust a woman who falls apart." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Hearing him talk about her like she was disposable, like she was prey, felt like being gutted. The next clip was worse. Sophie asked, "What if she gets a lawyer?" Grant laughed. "Who would represent a nobody like her? By the time I'm finished, she'll barely exist." Sophie's hands shook harder as she ended the playback. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Pierce's face went stiff. His earlier bias now a glaring liability. "Mr. Ellington, do you deny these statements?" Grant swallowed. "They're taken out of context." Caleb stepped in. "There's no context that rescues you from this," Grant's attorney whispered frantically, but Grant waved him off, sweat gathering at his temple. Sophie took a long breath. "There's more. He told me the pregnancy didn't matter. That once he secured full control of the company, he'd move on to someone more convenient." Another shockwave rolled through the courtroom. Evelyn's heart pounded. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a blueprint for her destruction. Grant lunged toward Sophie. "You traitor!" Caleb intercepted him. "Touch her, and you'll add assault to your list of problems." For the first time, Evelyn saw Grant stripped bare. Not powerful, not intimidating, just desperate. And his empire was starting to crack. The walls of Courtroom 4B felt tighter now, as if absorbing the growing panic radiating from Grant Ellington. Judge Pierce shifted uneasily, clearly rattled by Sophie's testimony and the damning recordings. But the room wasn't finished turning against him. Not yet. Caleb rose again, calm, but with a sharpness Evelyn hadn't seen before. "Your Honor, given the severity of Mr. Ellington's conduct, the court must also hear contextual information relevant to Mrs. Sawyer's family background. It explains why she withheld her legal surname and why Mr. Ellington targeted her." Grant scoffed. "What family background? She was nothing." Caleb's eyes hardened. "No, Grant. You assumed she was nothing." He gestured toward Evelyn. She felt everyone's gaze shift to her. Her pulse fluttered, but she nodded. Caleb turned to the judge. "Mrs. Sawyer comes from a lineage of federal investigators and judicial officers. Her uncle, Edward Sawyer." Judge Pierce inhaled sharply. Caleb continued, "Is the former lead investigator who prosecuted some of the largest corruption cases in Manhattan's history, including investigations involving your court, Your Honor." A hushed gasp spread through the room like wildfire. Pierce's face drained. He straightened stiffly in his seat. "Mr. Ward, that information is unnecessary." "It is absolutely necessary," Caleb said, voice steady. "Because Mr. Ellington knew who she was. He admitted as much in a text message Sophie forwarded to us minutes ago." He held up a printed screenshot. Grant lunged forward. "That's private communication," Pierce snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Ellington," Caleb read aloud. "If anyone finds out she's a Sawyer, it complicates everything. Keep her quiet." The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling like mad. Sophie crossed her arms, defiant. "He said he didn't want Sawyer blood near his company. He bragged about isolating her, so she couldn't reconnect with her family." Evelyn felt the sting of those words deeply. Grant hadn't just hurt her. He had strategically dismantled her identity. Judge Pierce rubbed his forehead, shaken. "This court was not informed of any Sawyer affiliation." Caleb's tone sharpened. "Exactly. And had you ruled against her minutes ago, Your Honor, the optics would have aligned with prior accusations of bias, accusations tied directly to the Sawyer family's investigations." You could hear a pin drop. Grant whispered urgently to his lawyer, panic rising. "Do something!" But no one could. Evelyn finally looked up, meeting Judge Pierce's eyes with quiet strength. For the first time, he looked away. Because the truth was undeniable. The Sawyer name didn't just freeze the room. It cracked the foundation beneath Grant and the judge himself. The courtroom felt different now. Charged, unsettled, no longer orbiting around Grant Ellington's manufactured power. Instead, every gaze shifted toward Evelyn as if seeing her with new eyes. She was no longer the frail woman sitting quietly in the defendant's chair. She was the last surviving branch of the Sawyer legacy, a legacy every corrupt official in Manhattan feared. Caleb stepped closer to her, his voice low but steady. "Evelyn, it's time. You need to speak now. Your voice carries more weight than you realize." Her heart thudded painfully. She had spent years shrinking herself to fit inside Grant's world. For so long, silence had been her safety. But now it felt like a cage she needed to break. Judge Pierce cleared his throat, still visibly shaken. "Mrs. Sawyer, do you wish to address the court?" Evelyn slowly rose. Her legs trembled, but her resolve didn't. She looked at Grant, once the center of her world, now exposed and cornered. Sophie wouldn't meet her eyes. Reporters leaned forward, anticipating blood. She inhaled deeply. "My silence," she began, voice soft but firm, "has been used against me. My pain has been twisted into evidence, my trust into a weapon." Grant scoffed. "Here we go." Caleb shot him a cold warning glare. "Mr. Ellington, one more interruption, and I'll request sanctions." Evelyn continued louder now. "I wasn't unstable. I was overwhelmed. I was pushed, manipulated, isolated, humiliated, and every moment of it was orchestrated by the man who vowed to protect me." Whispers erupted. Judge Pierce watched her intently. She lifted her chin. But Grant made one mistake. He underestimated the woman he tried to erase. Grant's jaw tightened. "Evelyn, stop!" "No," she said sharply. "You don't get to silence me anymore." Her voice resonated across the courtroom, clear, steady, unbreakable. "You stole my money, you stole my identity, you stole years of my life, but you couldn't steal who I am. I'm a Sawyer, and Sawyers don't stay buried." The words landed like a hammer. Caleb stepped beside her. "Your Honor, my client requests a full forensic audit of Mr. Ellington's finances and immediate protective orders to prevent intimidation or retaliation." Judge Pierce hesitated, a man caught between fear and consequence, but the weight of the Sawyer name pressed down harder. "Motion granted!" Grant's face drained of all color. Evelyn exhaled shakily, not in relief, but in awakening. For the first time, she felt it. Power. The courtroom had shifted into unfamiliar territory, no longer Grant Ellington's stage, no longer Judge Pierce's controlled environment. Something raw and electric pulsed through the air, a sense that justice had stopped tiptoeing and begun to run. Evelyn felt it too, a strange blend of fear and strength threading through her veins. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, you mentioned additional evidence. Please proceed." Caleb opened a sleek black folder and slid a USB drive toward the clerk. "What you're about to hear," he announced, "was provided by Ms. Mercer during recess. It corroborates the offshore accounts and reveals Mr. Ellington's intent." Grant shot to his feet. "This is illegal. She can't—" Pierce slammed his gavel. "Sit down." Grant sat. The audio file clicked on. Grant's voice oozed confidence. "I'll drain the accounts before she even knows what hit her. By the time Evelyn realizes she's broke, I'll have moved everything. She'll panic. They always panic. Then Pierce will rule in my favor. He owes me." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Judge Pierce went rigid, his face draining of its authoritative veneer. Caleb folded his hands. "Your Honor, the mention of your involvement—" Pierce cut him off, voice trembling. "The court will disregard any insinuation. Continue the audio." But his shaking hands said everything. The next part of the recording was even worse. Sophie's voice asked, "What if she finds out you used her signature for those transfers?" Grant laughed darkly. "She won't. I forged half of them. Evelyn signs anything with the right tone of voice." Evelyn's heart twisted painfully. Hearing him admit it, so casually, so cruelly, felt like reliving every moment she doubted herself. The final line was a dagger. "And once I'm appointed to the development board, no one will touch me, not even the Sawyers." The audio cut. Silence dominated the room, thick and suffocating. Reporters whispered furiously. Grant's lawyers looked ready to faint. Sophie stared at the floor, guilt carving her features into something hollow. Judge Pierce rubbed his temples. "Mr. Ellington, this is severe. Fraud, identity manipulation, coercion, attempted judicial influence." Caleb stepped forward. "And obstruction of justice. All federal offenses." Grant lunged for the USB, yelling, "This is a setup! Evelyn planned this. She's manipulating you all." Caleb blocked him easily. "No, Grant, this is you, in your own words." Evelyn met Grant's furious, terrified eyes. For years he controlled the narrative. But now? His own voice had destroyed him. Grant Ellington had always walked into rooms like he owned them. Now, for the first time, he looked small, trapped inside a courtroom that no longer bent to his will. Judge Pierce, pale and rattled, shuffled the papers before him, as though searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. Every eye in courtroom 4B watched Grant with a mixture of shock, disgust, and a sick sort of anticipation. Caleb's voice sliced through the silence. "Your Honor, given the evidence, I request an immediate freeze on all of Mr. Ellington's assets, domestic and international, and the appointment of a federal auditor." Grant slammed his palms against the table. "Absolutely not! You can't do that! I built everything in those accounts!" Caleb didn't blink. "With forged signatures and stolen identities." Sophie flinched at the word forged. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. She remembered signing papers she barely understood. Papers Grant had rushed her through, praising her trust while stealing her future. Judge Pierce cleared his throat, trying to maintain control. "Mr. Ellington, the allegations presented are substantial. This court cannot ignore—" "I made one mistake," Grant snapped, voice cracking. "One mistake, and suddenly I'm a criminal? This is ridiculous." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "One mistake?" The audio listed 9 separate felonies. Whispers filled the room. Grant pointed at Evelyn, face red with rage. "She planned this. She wanted to ruin me. She wanted revenge." Evelyn stood slowly, her voice steady. "Grant, you ruined yourself. You just never believed the consequences would reach you." That struck something deeper than anger, fear. True, bone-deep fear. Sophie stepped away from Grant entirely, her heels clicking backward. "He told me everything was under control," she said quietly, almost to herself. "He said she'd break before he ever would." Judge Pierce exhaled shakily. "Mr. Ellington, based on the evidence, the court is placing you under financial investigation. Your accounts are frozen effective immediately." Grant staggered back as though struck. "This is my company, my life." Caleb pressed the final blow. "Correction. With the forged documents, Mrs. Sawyer is the legal owner of 31% of Ellington Developments. She is now the second largest stakeholder." Gasps. Reporters lunged for microphones. Grant stared at Evelyn, horror widening his eyes. You can't take my company." Evelyn met his stare, unflinching. "I'm not taking anything, Grant. You handed it to me the moment you tried to erase me." For the first time, Grant Ellington realized he was no longer the one in control. News travels fast in Manhattan, but nothing spread faster than the collapse of Grant Ellington. By the time court recessed for the day, the sidewalk outside was a tornado of reporters, cameras, and microphones swarming like vultures catching the scent of a fresh corpse. Headlines were already hitting iPhones across the city. Ellington CEO under investigation for fraud. Mistress turns witness in shocking courtroom reversal. Secret Sawyer heir at center of scandal. Evelyn stepped outside beside Caleb, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. Flashes lit her vision, voices shouting her name, her real name, for the first time in years. "Ms. Sawyer, did you know about the offshore accounts? Are you pressing criminal charges? Is it true you now control part of Ellington Developments? Is Judge Pierce compromised?" Grant emerged moments later, and the tone of the crowd changed instantly. Reporters swarmed him with a ferocity he had never experienced. "Mr. Ellington, will you resign? Did you falsify your wife's medical records? Is it true you tried to bribe Judge Pierce?" Grant shoved past them, rage distorting his features. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who started the day. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled, his confidence gone. Sophie followed several paces behind him, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially him. "Traitor!" Grant hissed when she passed. Sophie stopped cold. Her voice trembled, but her words sliced sharp. "No, Grant. A traitor is someone who destroys the woman who loved him just to protect his ego." Her voice echoed down the courthouse steps. Reporters captured every syllable. Grant stormed off. But not before one camera caught the exact moment a courthouse official approached him and handed over a notice. Mandatory federal interview. Failure to appear will result in warrant. His face twisted with panic. Caleb glanced at Evelyn. This is only the beginning. His world is going to unravel piece by piece. Evelyn nodded, though her nerves trembled. I never wanted to destroy him. You didn't, Caleb said softly. He destroyed himself. You simply stopped standing in the wreckage. As they walked toward the waiting car, a modest black sedan Caleb arranged, not a luxury display, Evelyn noticed something she hadn't felt in months. The city didn't look as big. The sky didn't feel as heavy. And for the first time, she could breathe. Behind her, Grant faced a wall of cameras, shouting that he was the victim. But no one believed him anymore. Not after today. Evelyn's world had shifted so violently in a single afternoon that she barely recognized the woman staring back at her from the car window's reflection. She wasn't the timid spouse who once lived in Grant Ellington's shadow. She wasn't the woman who doubted her worth, who apologized for existing, who bent herself to fit into Grant's rigid mold. Something inside her had cracked open, and instead of collapsing, she was expanding. Caleb guided her into a quiet cafe off Madison Avenue, far from the reporters and flashing cameras. The warm smell of espresso and worn leather softened the sharp edges of the day. Evelyn wrapped her hands around a steaming cup, letting the heat seep into her trembling fingers. You handled yourself well, Caleb said, taking a seat across from her. I felt like I was falling apart, she admitted. Falling apart would have been staying silent, he replied. You did the opposite. She looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments still felt foreign, like shoes she hadn't broken in yet. I don't know what comes next, she whispered. Caleb opened his briefcase and slid over a stack of documents. Clean, professionally bound, and heavy with possibility. What comes next, he said, is that you reclaim your life. These papers begin the process of asserting your legal ownership in Ellington developments. We're not waiting for Grant to manipulate anything else. Her breath caught. I don't want his company. You're not taking it, Caleb said gently. You're taking back what he stole. The words settled over her like a promise. Evelyn stared at the documents. Income statements, asset summaries, structural control briefs, things Grant once waved in front of her, insisting she didn't need to understand. Now she saw them with new eyes. Not as a burden, but as leverage, as empowerment. Still, insecurity crept in. What if I can't handle all of this? I was barely keeping myself together. Caleb leaned forward. Evelyn, you survived emotional warfare. You walked into a courtroom alone and left with half the city whispering your name in awe. Don't underestimate yourself. A small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. Then, his voice softened. And you're not alone anymore. She didn't look up immediately, afraid her expression might reveal too much. Fear, gratitude, something deeper she wasn't ready to name. But inside her chest, where panic once lived, something else stirred. Hope. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Evelyn Sawyer wondered if the end of her marriage might be the beginning of her life. The final hearing took place 3 weeks later, but the damage to Grant Ellington's empire had already spread like a wildfire across Manhattan. His name, once displayed proudly on glossy billboards and real estate brochures, was now stamped across headlines tied to fraud, manipulation, coercion, and federal violations. Investors fled. Board members resigned. Ellington Developments became a sinking ship, and Grant was strapped to the mast. Courtroom 4B was packed beyond standing room for the final verdict. Reporters lined the walls. Even people with no connection to the case showed up, hungry to witness the downfall of a man who once believed himself untouchable. Evelyn entered quietly, her posture straighter than it had been in years. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but she carried herself like someone who finally understood her own worth. Caleb walked beside her, offering a reassuring nod. Grant arrived moments later, escorted, not accompanied. His suit hung awkwardly, his eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was desperation. Judge Pierce took his seat, voice grave. This court has reviewed all evidence, including financial records, forged signatures, manipulated audio, and witness testimony. Grant swallowed hard. Pierce continued, Mr. Ellington, the court finds substantial grounds for criminal investigation. Effective immediately, you are removed from any leadership role at Ellington Developments. Your assets will remain frozen pending federal review. A collective gasp swept the room. And as for Mrs. Evelyn Sawyer, the judge went on, the court recognizes her as a primary stakeholder wrongfully deceived and grants her legal ownership of her 31% share, along with restitution for damages. Grant surged to his feet. You can't give her my company. She's nothing without— Pierce slammed the gavel. Enough! You built your downfall with your own hands. Grant's voice cracked. Evelyn, please. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but clarity. I lost myself loving you, she said softly, but I found myself surviving you. Grant collapsed back into his seat, defeated. Outside the courthouse, the winter air felt softer, lighter. Evelyn stepped out into a sea of flashing lights, but this time she didn't shrink. She stood tall. Caleb approached her, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. You did it. No, she said. We did. He hesitated, then asked quietly, So, what comes next for Evelyn Sawyer? She met his gaze, warmth blooming in her chest. Whatever I choose. As they walked down the courthouse steps side by side, Manhattan didn't feel like the city that broke her. It felt like the city she finally conquered. All right, my wonderful friends. If you're still here with me at this very moment, then something in Evelyn's journey must have touched a part of your heart. Maybe her pain reminded you of a chapter you've lived. Maybe her strength helped you breathe a little deeper. Or maybe, just maybe, you needed to hear that surviving doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You know, the ancient Stoics had a way of putting things so simply, yet so powerfully. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." And that's exactly what Evelyn discovered. That sometimes what feels like the end is really the doorway back to yourself. Pain shapes us. Betrayal redirects us. And as Seneca said, fire tests gold, adversity tests the brave. You, my friend, are braver than you think. So as this story comes to an end, maybe we pause together, you and I, and ask, what part of me is ready to rise again? Because healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It begins the moment you decide that you deserve better. If this journey moved you, even just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your presence here means more than you know, and we're building a space where stories heal, empower, and remind us we're never alone. Stay with us. Your next chapter might start right here,